Can an introvert really be a great leader? Or do you still believe that to be an effective leader, we really need high levels of energy and a dominating presence? Hi, everyone. Welcome to Psych for Business, Decoding Business Behaviors. I'm Dr. Igor Menezes, academic, researcher, and consultant with over 20 years of experience working in the fields of people analytics, business analytics, psychometrics, and more recently, AI. My work focuses on uncovering behavior patterns that optimize process, support thriving teams, and drive smarter business decisions. So on this channel, we critically examine popular beliefs, business beliefs through the lens of rigorous academic research. So today we are addressing a very controversial topic that I've seen many times and I've been asked many times, which is, if I'm a leader, can I be an introvert? So is there anything that would prevent me from being a good leader if I'm an introvert? So I've seen these questions from many people, HR managers, executives, and even companies founders. But of course, today we are addressing this question with the idea of covering the empirical evidence related to it. So, to properly analyze introversion and extroversion, we need first to understand exactly what introversion or extroversion is. For that, we initially need to go back a few steps and analyze what personality traits are. So probably everyone know what personality is, but personality usually tends to assess the more stable elements of the human behavior. So when you say, for example, that I'm an extroverted person is because you tend to behave in a certain way that is related to the trait extroversion. But let's just go back a few steps and analyze theoretically what personality is. One of the most prevalent theories of personality is the Big Five model, which stands for Big Five. Why Big Five? Is exactly because we measure five big traits of personality. The easiest way to understand each of these traits and to remember and to recall them is actually to follow the acronym OCEAN. What is OCEAN? OCEAN stands for openness to experience. That's exactly the O. Openness to experience is to what extent the person, as the name says, is open to new ideas, has intellectual curiosity, and really likes to be in contact with new things. Then we move to the C. C stands for conscientiousness, which encompasses this capacity of planning, organizing, this more goal-oriented behavior. So that's the C. Let's move to the E. E is exactly the extraversion, this element we are talking about, and it tends to be related to the levels of energy that you have and to what extent you really like to be surrounded by other people. So that's the gregariousness that you have. And then we are moving to the A element of the ocean. A stands for agreeableness. Agreeableness relates to this characteristic of being more empathetic, more cooperative, to show more pro-social behaviors towards others. And finally, the N element is the negative element, but N doesn't stand for the negative, but for the neuroticism element. And neuroticism relates to the emotional instability. So it's more related to the stress resilience that the person has. So that configures what personality is according to the Big Five model. This reflects when we're talking about personality traits, extroversion, and their relationship with leadership, it's always important to relate this to some cultural biases towards extroverted people. We tend to believe that if you are a leader and to be a good leader, you necessarily need to be a extroverted person. So a couple of years ago, Adam Grant, who is based at the University of Wharton, and his colleagues they examined leadership effectiveness across different personality types. And what they revealed was, if you are an introverted person, you are 28% more likely than your counterparts, your extroverted people, then to outperform them and to have a better performance, to really show the traits that you are really a good leader. And that's quite telling, because all of the literature before then was more related to the idea that if you are sociable, if you coordinate social situations well, and if you want to be with other people, that's exactly what leadership is about or should be about. But then what we see is that there's few other differences in terms of these traits, and some literature was also derived from these initial studies conducted by Adam Grant. But what we can see is that despite these distinctions between being introverted or extroverted, in practice, we rarely, of course, find some extremes between those things. So it's nearly impossible to find someone who is 100% extroverted or 100% introverted. And even the measures, and there's something we call too much of a good thing in terms of measurement, we would still contest this idea. Why? Because if you also have someone who is 100% extrovert, they start to become, a mess, a mess and a hassle. And if we have someone who is 100% introvert, we have someone who will not speak with anyone. So of course, we don't have anyone on these extremes. And there's another thing, which is the distinction between personality as a trait and personality as a state. So what does it mean? So personality as a trait is exactly these stable traits, stable characteristics that we carry with us on a daily basis. So when I deal with someone, I'm always having these traits as part of who I am. That's the baseline of who I am. But on the other hand, some circumstances, some situations would demand that I behave in a different way. So, for example, I'm a really introverted person, but in my role as a lecturer, I need to teach students. And sometimes I need to teach 400 students in a big auditorium, but that doesn't preclude me or prevent me from speaking with them, from telling jokes, and to be a bit more extroverted. This is exactly when the trait starts to manifest itself in a different way, and that's what we call personality as a state. The state is exactly the situation that will require me to behave differently, to express myself in a way that, in this case, tend to be a bit more extroverted. Okay, so effective leaders, of course, they understand both the trait baseline and the capacity for state flexibility. So if you take a good leader, even though they are introverted people, they know exactly how to switch between these two things, because some environments and some moments they need to take the ownership of a situation. Sometimes they just need to act differently, but at the end of the day, at the bottom of their hearts, they're still introverts. There's another misconception that we also have in the literature, which is the difference between introversion and shyness. So they look like the same thing, but they are not. They are two separate, distinct things. Why? Because personality traits or personality is much more about the levels of energy that you put into the task. It's neurobiological. Whereas shyness relates more to social anxiety, to the fear of being judged by other people. So it's more related to neuroticism, it's more related to the emotional instability. So these two things sometimes look very closely connected, because shy people tend to look like introvert people. I mean, in terms of how they connect to others, how they express themselves. But they are different traits, different what we call in psychometrics, different constructs. Okay? So that's a very important thing also to pinpoint. So this distinction between shyness and extroversion is also really crucial for development strategies. So if I know that I'm shy, if I know that I'm introvert, so I can, for example, have either an anxiety management program if I'm shy, for example, or I can have a more confidence building intervention if I'm an introvert person. So that would be feeding back to what we need for learning and development purposes. Okay, finally, let's address something which is crucial in the field of organizational psychology, which is the measurement of personality traits, the measurement of the extroversion trait, for example. So in psychometrics, we have something that we call psychometric parameters. So we need to understand exactly, just to be very clear, we need to understand exactly whether uh, something that we intend to measure, like extroversion, is really measured by the instruments that we have developed. And that's what we call construct validity. Instruments overall should follow very strict parameters for construct validity, reliability, standardization, how to understand, how to interpret the scores of the tests. And for personality assessments, I would highly recommend a platform called ipip.org, which stands for International Personality Item Pool. So you can see a pool of validated items that could be used to measure introversion, extroversion traits. In my research, I also developed an instrument which combines text and image, and we are investigating exactly how multimodal AI could be used to understand, have a better interpretability for these traits. So this instrument is called Visualize, and it's also a validated measure. So if we intend to measure personality, if we intend to cover exactly the personality traits, more specifically extroversion, introversion, I would highly recommend you that you get hold of one of these validated instruments. So there are a few open source versions, as I mentioned, the IP platform, and a few other instruments that vendors could supply. Okay, so we know that the stakes here are significant. So if you use an instrument that's not valid, you can come up with a result that will change profoundly the individual's life. So for example, imagine that you're using this instrument for recruitment purpose, and then you have an instrument that doesn't differentiate quite clearly whether the person is more introverted or extroverted, but your job description wants someone who is really extroverted. But then if you're not measuring correctly, you're just randomly ranking the individuals. So you are not actually measuring the actual traits. So that's why measuring is something so serious, because we are making decisions about people's lives. Okay, let's just now to wrap up. I think that's very important to say that the primary barrier to be really overcome here is the individual capabilities, the social stereotype that we have towards people who are more extrovert. So the literature mostly says that, to be leaders, it's important to be connected with people, to be sociable, gregarious, etc. But at the same time, most of the literature would not cover the importance of being introvert. Okay, so if you want to know more about this topic, I would recommend that you take a look at these papers that I'm putting down below. Uh, I would appreciate any comments. So we are just starting this channel with this video, but please feel free to share any observations, any questions in the comments below. Okay. So if you find value in evidence-based analysis of organizational psychology, people analytics, psychometrics, all these things that we just discussed, please subscribe and activate the notifications, sorry. Our goal is to elevate business psychology, just goes beyond popular assumptions towards rigorous, applicable insights. Okay, I'm Dr. Igor Menezes, and this is Psych for Business channel, Decoding Business Behaviors. See you the next time. Bye-bye.